guys. It's been a pretty rough couple of days for me. You see, I basically went to my doctor's and they did some x-rays because I was having some pain in my chest. And I'm sorry to say that I've been diagnosed with a poopy butt in the lungs. I was very horrified to find that out. That's like a near-death guarantee. But the doctor thinks that, probably what happened was some mongrel didn't clean their sex toy when we were having sex during our anniversary. So maybe now I'm now infected with poopy butt. And I don't want to point any fingers. I don't want to lay any blame. This is more about education now than, saving me or shaming someone who didn't do the proper techniques in proper sex toy management. But that's neither here nor there. Why are you looking at me like this?
Because you're spreading lies.
I'm not spreading lies. The doctor said I had poopy butt in my lungs. I can't help it. I'm going to die, Merlin.
I do clean sex toys. How dare you?
Not the one time that gave me poopy butt, clearly. Because I'm dying.
Sense.
I'm literally hooked up to a UV right now that's feeding me blood. But, again, I don't want to point any fingers. I don't want to lay any blame, even though it was clearly Merlin's fault for not cleaning the sex toy. But again, that's not why I'm telling you this. It's about training you and educating you people to not give your loved ones poopy butt in their lungs. So please clean your sex toys, people.
I mean, it ended on a good message, so I'll allow it.
Gay programming.
Hey, welcome to Gay Programming, another episode of the greatest podcast in the queer-centric world of the internet. As always, I am your host, Fem Marks, aka Marcie Coy, and I'm joined by my beloved boyfriend / co-host, Merlin Kirby, aka Angsty Vegan. How you doing, boo?
I'm good. How have you been?
I'm doing great. I'm doing fine because we have a smacking, scintillating, tasty episode for you today because Merlin is actually for once in his life, taking charge on this episode to bring us a scintillating episode on a topic that he holds quite near and dear to his heart. In fact, he's studying it right now. So yeah, what do you got for us today, Merlin?
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to talk about a very vague topic I can only describe as weirdness in the field of psychology, kind of specifically a focus on sexology. But yeah, because I think it's really important, you should trust professionals, be aware that they are humans, and
or incorporate their own biases that they've developed over their own lifespan, or might even have been incorporated like biases from the education that they received from whatever institution from whatever time period.
Yeah, exactly. Or even, at times may fall to corporate interests. So, it's always wise to kind of keep your head on your shoulders. And again, I'm not saying your psychiatrist is dumb, go off your meds right now. But, just always be aware of the fact that they're people, and people are very varied in their...
Well, it's just, in general, this almost sounds like a closing statement, but I guess I'm opening with it, where it's just, psychiatry in general is like a developing process to everyone. So, it's not a science in the purest extent, to the extent where now it's it's just basically, it's a process, and what everyone may think is the right thing may not necessarily be the right thing.
Yeah, for sure. So I've got a couple little fun facts, and then I kind of wanted to do a little, very kind of brief story of one of my favorite, not exactly a psychologist, but a
He's
physician.
kinda,
yeah, a
he
physician
orients,
and sexologist.
yeah.
Those are kind of his
definitely
two.
a pretty early prelude to sex therapy as a whole.
Oh, yeah. So, the first fact that I do have is not related to sex whatsoever, but I'm going to share it because it's kind of I want to do a future episode on it, so I want to get your guys' interest going in that. So, I've kind of talked to you about it, but did you ever hear before we talked about it how schizophrenia, like, was overdiagnosed in black men, and that's kind of where a lot of the bias that schizophrenics are dangerous and violent and crazy came from, because, like, the main reasoning for these diagnoses was, before this, it was primarily, like, a white, like, it was treated very well. It was like, oh, yeah, you've just got some hallucinations. I'm sorry, love. Let's fix it. But then, a lot of black people were saying, like, hey, to their therapist or their psychiatrist, like, I know I'm being treated fucked up because of my skin color, and that's giving me depression and anxiety and whatever. And then the white doctors were going, oh, that's paranoia. That's schizophrenia. That's paranoia.
Yeah, we're not racist.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? You're fucking... What is gaslighting? What is that? Shut the fuck up.
Yeah, so due to that, the numbers of schizophrenia diagnosis in black men particularly skyrocketed, and now it is perceived as this dangerous, awful disorder. And so that's just kind of one example I have of a situation where, yes, schizophrenia is a real disorder, but at the same time, it's diagnosed by humans, which are flawed creatures.
So it's kind of like, I don't know if this is what you were meaning to connect it to, but, and I know this is for, like, kind of a more in-depth episode about schizophrenia in particular.
Yeah.
But it does kind of seem like even in its early use as a description or a term of, like, oh, someone has schizophrenia, was even from the very onset a very exploitative term, and still to this day remains that, because hey man, it's fucking awesome when your horror movie has a schizophrenic serial killer who has multiple voices and is crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of, I never knew that its origin was literally like white healthcare professionals gaslighting black people into saying, like, there's no Jim Crow, you're ridiculous.
Yeah, and, like, it makes so much sense. I was so, like, infuriated when I found that out, too, because, like, obviously, as a white person, I am not nearly taking, like, the brunt of the effects of this, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, are you telling me this fucking disorder I have a huge part of why it's so stigmatized is because of something as stupid and awful as racism? Like, there's no other reason, it's just racism. That's like, I got so mad.
Welcome to America. Yeah. Everything always somehow leads to racism. It's like the biggest ball of yarn that everyone hates getting to the middle of.
Yeah. So that was I definitely want to do more research into, like, also just, physiologically what schizophrenia is, because I think a lot of people just flat out don't know, again, due to all the stigma. But so that's the little tip of the iceberg that I thought was a really interesting tip that I wanted to share about it. But my next little fun fact that I have for everyone is talking about the idea of sex addiction. So you've totally heard of, like, treatment for sex addiction, right? Like,
I mean, I've gone through it, and they've failed every single time. I mean, like, I just keep getting hard. Every time I wear a dress, I get a boner euphoria from it, and they keep saying, like, you're a pervert! Mm-hmm. You're sex hungry!
Yeah, so...
In my 1920s hospital, everyone speaks Mid-Western Atlantic.
Damn, what's their address?
Transatlantic.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was really interesting, and I found this out, if anyone wants to do, their own research and look at the source material that I found. The book Sex Outside the Lines by Chris Donahue, PhD. Lovely book, great author. Highly recommend it. Anyway, so the idea of sex addiction, that you're just fucking too much. You know, you gotta dial it back, and here's some very intense treatment on how to do that. Fun fact, the fucking DSM-5, the book that is just, and you know, all of its previous versions, just obsessed with pathologizing every single human behavior, has actually, on multiple occasions, rejected, like, sex addiction being a possible diagnosis in it, because they claim that there's, like, not enough non-opinionated evidence, because they're just repeatedly going back to all of these people who are like, oh, sex addiction's real, we gotta stop it. And they're like
all of their references are just like Protestant preachers.
yeah, no, that's literally happened. They were like, yeah, but like you're citing like religious stuff for this, and we can't do that.
Yeah, sorry guys, this is literally, you know, like not church. This isn't church, people.
Yeah. And like, granted, you know, depending on how you define the words for yourself, like hypersexuality is in the DSM-5, but like sex addiction as a stone cold hard thing by itself is not in there, has been rejected on multiple accounts. So I'm not, like, the likelihood of this is so small, but if anyone listening to this is in treatment for sex addiction, you are getting scammed so hard.
And I mean, especially like you even see like some of the early history of like who is being targeted with the term like sex addiction.
Oh yeah.
And it almost always was like targeting either cis women primarily, or, you know, homosexuals, by just saying like, oh, they're generally promiscuous. But like also at the same time, like a man could have just as much sex drive as the woman who is claimed to be a nymphomaniac sex fiend. And it's different for him, because that's just what men do. Men are, you know, that's what they do. They fuck. And are we going to judge men because I'm a man who is writing the laws right now?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you know, of course I'm not a sex fiend, but this fucking, my wife who wants to sleep around with other people, that's a no-go.
Yeah.
No way.
Well, yeah, no, and like, it's just so interesting when you think about the idea of something like sex addiction existing in a culture that prioritizes like very strict monogamy and a very set schedule of like, oh, you're supposed to have it because that's normal, but not too much because that's not normal, and just like these very arbitrary guidelines that don't even exist in a lot of other cultures. Like, of course you're gonna want to come up with something like that. And it's just like, it's so bizarre to me too, because we were talking about that ball of yarn. I remember, and I haven't finished this book yet, but Women, Race, and Class also talks about like the hypersexualization of black families and black women specifically.
Yeah.
And I know that is another group that is very targeted by this false idea of like sex addiction.
Yeah. I mean, especially in, I mean, you know, there's like a big history, you know, I know I said cis women, but I mean, especially black men in particular have always been not just created to be like violent characters in their own right, but also as sex-crazed fiends. And I mean, there's plenty of cases, unfortunate cases, all across this country, all throughout our history, of black men being accused of hitting on a white woman, or even raping a white woman, or raping someone else, and a lot of people just kind of taking it and assuming that it must be true because, hey, you know, black kids, you know, they're kind of, they get a little uppity. They insult me, and that makes me feel bad and makes me assume things that are like supporting to the racist society.
Yeah, no, it's just like really awful. And obviously, like, I also just kind of want to put it as a disclaimer. Well, I absolutely do not believe in the idea of sex addiction. I do believe in like unhealthy sex.
Oh, yeah.
No, like that's, I just wanted to clarify that is very much a thing, and if your sex life is causing you pain in any way, you should absolutely talk to someone about it, but...
Yeah, like, it's definitely a point where it's like, you know, when someone is having constant sex that is between consenting adults and, you know, like in a fine atmosphere that was not coerced or whatever, like, you know, that to label that as sex addiction is ridiculous because no one is really getting harmed. The only thing that's being harmed is like maybe someone's perception of what a woman should be. Oh, I don't want a black man having sex with my wife or whatever. Like, you know, some kind of like reinforcement to the status quo of society and power structures. But, you know, like also at the same time, like, yeah, there's totally cases. Like the most extreme, of course, would be something like pedophilia. Like if someone has that urge, that is a form of sex addiction that's not okay. Or someone who has like, I don't know if you would call it sex addiction, but like some kind of sexual lust or desire that wouldn't be cool or cohesive to a society of any form and should be dealt with, and to the extent that like we should understand this and try to treat these people or handle with whatever way. But, you know, I think what I was trying to say is like connecting where like when we say like there's no such thing as sexual addiction, that should not be correlated with like, oh, there's no such thing as bad sex.
Yeah, no. Like that is absolutely a thing. Sexual abuse is absolutely a thing in the sense of like abusing somebody, but also, you know, having sex for the wrong reasons, whatever. Granted, wrong reasons is very up to interpretation, so I trust our listeners to know that, like, when I say wrong reasons, I don't mean a whole lot of things. I just mean, like, emotional abuse or, like, whatever.
Yeah.
So my next little thing that I kind of took from the same author, the same book, it was another point he touched on. What do you think about the idea of codependency?
You know, like, what do you mean? Like someone who's, like, needs the existence of another person?
Well, yeah, or, like, you know, codependency, like, two people heavily dependent on each other.
I mean, I definitely think there could be a good situation of that and a bad situation of that. I mean, the bad one would be obviously, like, if one person's a drug addict and another person's also a drug addict, probably not a good mix because then you get, you know, Sex Pistol shit happening. But you know, on the other extreme, like I do think someone who, you know, maybe is like one person's depressed and the other person's anxious, and somehow that difference in like tenderness can help them kind of build upon one another and like a coexistence. So yeah, I mean, like that's what I would take from that general question. That but it could be good and bad depending on the situation,
as most human relationships are. Well, another kind of thought that was proposed in the book that I found really interesting was the idea that, you know, what is labeled as codependency is not really a problem and is actually just a very natural state of human being, because, you know, the whole, again, like, diagnostic, you know, kind of criteria for it is like, oh, these two people rely on each other too much. They're too close to each other, they rely on each other, they're too comforted by each other, they need to be on their own. Where, you know, the author was kind of asking the question of, like, what is too much? Why do they need to be on their own? If they're both happy in this relationship where they, you know, live together, or, you know, however many people they are, what is wrong with them being dependent on each other when humans are pack animals, and that's just kind of how we function, is relying on each other. So what do you think of that kind of, like, are you kind of more like, nah, there's a point where, like, you're too close to each other? Or are you kind of more like, no, I mean, makes sense?
I mean, kind of maybe jumping off on another route, but trying to answer your question is, I mean, I definitely think now there's like too much insistence on people being alone. Like, you know, you just
feels like a very American thing.
Yeah, you know, and I'm sure, especially like because it you know, this loneliness is almost instilled from like a neoliberal like economic order. So maybe this might just become the new way of unfortunate living. But it definitely feels to me that more and more people are just kind of expected and almost just kind of destined to, like, be alone. They're going to have a studio apartment. They're going to be in there. They got their one job and, like, a side hustle or two. And they just like live and constantly grind and hustle, and they get DoorDash. They don't even go out to restaurants
Yeah.
or movies anymore. That's like none of that shit. Like you just stay in your house and you work and you die. And you know, I definitely do think it's become more and more a thing where I just see a lot more guys and girls who just like, you know, don't have a relationship. And it's not even like someone who's like, oh, I just don't value a relationship because of X, Y, and Z, which would be totally fine, totally cool. Some people are like that. But also just like people who do want a relationship but have no ability or understanding of how to accumulate a relationship, for like
Yeah.
lack of a better term. Like they don't know what a fulfilling relationship is.
Yeah.
And they can't maintain it. And even when they do get into relationships, it's like almost like 9 times out of 10 it's just gonna like either dissipate or just like move on to the next thing or
The
whatever.
idea that it's like so far out of your comfort zone that you like shy away from it almost, even if it might be, you know, might be what you think is better for you, but you still kind of are afraid of it.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, but you know, bringing you back to like codependence is just like I think if there was like a group of psychiatry that was like, oh, we need to stress the individualism of people, like people shouldn't be looking for relationships and love, like we should be focusing on ourselves and our contribution to like society around us.
Yeah.
That's the only things we should focus on. And it just feels like so fucking hollow.
Yeah.
It feels so fucking lonely. Like, you know, that classic, you know, the early like second generation of like feminists in like the 80s, where it's just like, oh, women should get the job and go work in the company, and that's how we're going to be empowered.
Right.
But it's just like, yeah, well, you're working for a fucking company.
Yeah.
Like now you're an ad exec. Awesome. You're making more money, but are you happy? And are you actually empowered? Or you know, even like have it like meaningful relationships that, you know, are kind of like the basis of getting by in life. You know, 'cause if you don't have anyone, then what the fuck's the point? You're just gonna play 3DS until you shoot yourself? Like what?
Yeah, no, and it was because in the book he kind of redefined codependency in a way that I really like, in a way that also made me realize some more independence geared people might even define us as codependent, because like, yeah, you know, we work separate schedules and we both have some of our own like friend things that we go and do on our own, but at the same time, like, we'd live together, we'd spend a lot of time together, and they're usually like 9 times out of 10 when there is an event, like, we do go together. We don't want to go by ourselves or like whatever. Like, we spend a lot
This
of time.
episode is about how we're failing as
No, yeah,
relationships.
but and like, you know,
we're bored. We're both bored.
no. Like, we're just very close to each other, and you know, it kind of redefined codependency as, you know, quote, like, not a direct quote, but a heightened desire for closeness, and that, you know, posed the idea that it was very kind of arrogant to view that heightened desire for closeness as like a problem. And I was like, yeah, that's actually really cool. It makes a lot of sense. So that was another thing. And I also wanted to talk about how, and I've seen a lot of this like online, you know, a lot of very blanket therapy is bad, psychologists are evil, the whole mental health practice is bad, and it really kind of conflicted me.
Which is yet another continuation of attack against the humanities that Americans love so much.
Yeah, no, and it really conflicted me for a while, because I was like, oh shit, like, as a leftist, does my desire to be a sex therapist, like, negate that part of me? Like, I was really having, like, some internal problems with it for a while, but, because, you know, like, there totally are some mental health practices and some practitioners who, like, really promote complacency within the working class and really promote, like, no, it's fine. It's okay. There's no problems. You're fine. But, so, like, you know, of course be wary of that, but that's why I came to a resolve over that conflict I was having, because I was kind of like, well, if anything, wouldn't that make it like a higher need for more radical mental health practices? Like, um, and I know you've had some kind of difficult and conflicting thoughts about mental health as a field.
Well, no. I mean, I guess my current thoughts on mental health is more on the problems of like institution.
Yeah.
Like, as a practice and as it's a wonderful thing to
Right.
sit down, try to understand people, try to like get like, the social sciences are valid and psychiatry can be valid. But at the same time, this is something that has been around for centuries now. It's developed certain institutions that have been incorporated by certain national groups or other power hierarchy structures. And they do, like they do with everything else they get their grubby little goblin hands on, incorporated into the empire.
Yeah.
And to serve the empire. So, while I think psychiatry on its very own can be very beneficial and help a lot of people, there's definitely been a dark fucking history of psychiatry that still kind of continues to this day. I mean, something that personally connects to my identity is gay conversion therapy.
Yeah.
Which, like, we can't, like, now it's kind of like a niche thing that's kind of off on the center, like, off on the sides of society now.
You gotta be crazy to want that.
You gotta be crazy to want it, but it's still around, and it's still very prominent, and a lot of people have their fields in, and even if we go back a few decades, it was a part of the nation. This was a part of an institutional understanding of homosexuality, and that it was a problem that needed to be corrected through things like crazy shit like shock therapy, or just isolating people, or doing these like psychological torture. So yeah, I think that relates to your anxiety of like, oh, should I participate in the, like, if I become a therapist or a sex therapist or whatever, will I just end up serving a part of the institution?
Yeah.
And, I would say that, like, just like every field, such as lawyer, being a doctor, being a therapist, these are places where, they are filled with a lot of conservative fucking nut jobs who have used their field of understanding to do some of the most evil shit imaginable. But also at the same time, we need Harry Potter to come. We need Harry Potter to take the wizarding wand and teach Voldemort to be destroyed.
Yeah.
That's what we need. We need Jedis when there are Sith. But that's kind of what I'm getting at. But yeah, it's definitely, I think a lot of people's misgivings are somewhat valid, at least in the history that, there's a lot of fucking people who have used psychiatry, or at least the name of psychiatry, to do justify really some really fucking heinous evil shit.
Oh, yeah,
so absolutely. That's like, I think, the misgiving to it. But I don't think you should be dissuaded if you feel you genuinely have a progressive contribution to get to the field, because if anything, that's what we need more of in those fields.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of, hearing you talk about it, and even, the whole conversation, it connects in a way that it hasn't for me before, where I think a lot about, a lot of the really seedy shit in the weight loss industry, and the bribing of physicians, and just, all of the shit that happened to, like, get doctors to be like, being fat is bad, we need to lower the healthy BMI, and how a lot of it was just money related, selling more weight loss drugs, selling more Weight Watchers programs, like, all of that shit, and doctors were just fully supportive in that, because then they were getting paid more.
Yeah. They'd be like, oh, well, have you ever heard of the Jimmy Breaks workout tapes? I happen to have a few hundred in my closet, if you'd like. I also have some pills, just some random pills a man gave me out back.
Yeah, right? God. Yeah, it's so fucked up how we, like, allow that. Like, I'm gonna go on a whole separate tangent here, but I remember my mom literally convinced her doctor to prescribe weight loss pills for her.
Mm-hmm.
And they started, like, immediately and very severely for a while, making her hair fall out. And I'm like, why is the FDA allowing this? Like, guys, you hate fat people so much that you're allowing, like, whatever the fuck is in these drugs for people to just get them from their doctor. Like, I don't know. That is a whole other angry episode. But, like, so all of this talk about sexology and seedy shit and doctors and everything, I wanted to do a little spotlight on a lovely, lovely person from history.
One of the OGs, one of the Santa Claus of trans people.
He truly is. I love him. We've mentioned him many a time.
Yeah.
Our boy Magnus Hirschfeld, looking at a framed photo of him right now. He watches over our living room very lovingly.
Yeah, he's very affirming, very dope looking. He's got a dope looking fucking mustache. He takes very good care of that fucking mustache.
His little bow tie, I see it.
Yeah, he's so fucking cool. He's so cool.
Anyway, just make the entire rest of the episode just us describing this photo and talking about how cool he is.
I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it. These fucking troglodytes who listen to this podcast don't deserve any better.
Kidding, we love y'all.
Yeah, secretly, I love you, fam. Secretly like and repost this.
So yeah, he was born Jewish, and he also grew into a homosexual. Just basic knowledge there.
He was converted, actually.
Yeah.
He got taken off the streets as a young boy.
Yeah. So he actually, I didn't know this, but it makes a lot of sense. Before, he earned his medical degree in 1892, he was actually a philosophy student. I did not know that.
Oh, wow, yeah, neither did I.
Right? And it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because, like, reading his books, they do kind of read like a philosophy major, almost.
Yeah. Do you say that lovingly or as a critique?
Oh, no, he's one of the good philosophy writers. Because, he's a little bit queer, so he's got a little personal edge to it.
Yeah,
a little flowery touch.
Another thing I didn't know was he spent... he was born in Germany. He spent, I believe, 8 months traveling the U.S., and he actually went to Chicago, and he saw a lot of the homosexuals there, and that's where he developed, like, the theory, and the fact that this was even a theory that needed to be developed is, like, beyond me, but... The theory that, like, homosexual culture was the same, more or less, around the world. So it wasn't like the gays in Germany were their own breed, and the gays in Chicago were their own other breed. It was like, no, they're all gay. Like, they all have that in common. They all have that culture in common. They're all gay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah. As someone who is, like, actually a person who was, like, one of the few people to actually start, like, there's this group of people that no one seems to really know anything about unless you're a part of them.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this is like, I've gone to a lot of different places, and all these queers, they're kind of the same. I'm kind of the same group of people every time I go.
Yeah. And then, a little bit later, around this time, the whole Oscar Wilde trials were happening.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, Oscar Wilde was a famous poet and writer of his time. Maybe I'll even include a poem of his. I'm not a fan. I don't think his shit. I don't think his shit aged well, but he was a homosexual, clearly a homosexual. And I guess the British people finally realized that, and they're like, "Oh, governor, we're gonna put you in the dungeon for being a homosexual." And that's he's more, I think, important as a symbol of homosexual discrimination.
Oh, yeah, no,
rather
like,
than a writer, but
a lot of like writers and just like anyone who I read about at the time who was queer, it was like they were heavily affected by the Oscar Wilde trial.
oh, I'm
like,
sure, yeah, because they saw themselves. They saw fuck.
It was a big deal at the time for sure.
I got to cut back on the leotards and entering with a grand entrance.
Yeah. So anyway, he, grew up. He worked hard. He grinded. And he developed his Institute for Sexual Research, which I think is, like, the coolest because, it was where he kind of started the whole, like, HRT and, like, gender reassignment surgery thing, pretty much. And that's where he did it. But he also did a lot of, book writing and researching, and a lot of his patients who he saw, for gender transition stuff, he actually hired in various roles like nurses or receptionists or whatever he could, pretty much, because he knew nobody else would. And a lot of them were students as well, and just, I'm pretty sure he even, like, lived on, like, and I could be misremembering, but I'm pretty sure him and his boyfriend, who either they both did or one of them did, or somebody in that relationship did drag as well. I'm pretty sure they, like, lived on the second floor of it and, like, held parties for, like, weird, like, it just sounds like a wonderful place.
Do you think Magnus Hirschfeld would have liked RuPaul's Drag Race?
I don't.
Yeah, he probably would have hated it.
Yeah.
Because he's a big like proponent against extravagance. I've found that out in some of his books.
Well, and I also just, the whole transphobia thing, I think, and the whole fracking thing, I think might have also...
He'd be like, what the fuck is fracking?
I know, but I think if you put him in 2020 right now, and he had all the
He, like, pulls out his notebook, he's like, is that a new sex pose of the future? Like, what is this?
No, like, if he knew more,
yeah, no,
I think he would.
I'm fucking, but yeah, I don't think he would like that.
No, I don't think he would be a big fan.
But yeah, one thing I wanted to add is that, kind of, it should be stated that Magnus Hirschfeld was at the very, at the time of his, of him studying and researching and publishing his findings, he was the leading source of talking about anything to do with homosexuality. Go to Magnus Hirschfeld. Because that was pretty much the one and only guy who was even willing to even step in this stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
And talk about this stuff to the point that he did.
Yeah.
And, this... he was definitely just like a person of the early to mid 20th century who was the guy who was understanding and trying to have, like, a better cohesive understanding of what the homosexual experience was.
Yeah, definitely. No, like, he literally, my next point was that he literally coined the term transvestite in 1910 to describe, what today would be called transgender people.
Yeah.
So he did all of that. He had this wonderful institute that just sounds like, I wish it existed today, just this lovely little safe haven, and... he also...
Just as an ominous little bit of foreshadowing, this awesome building happened to be in Germany.
Yes.
In the mid 20th century, so we'll leave you.
Think about what was happening around 1910.
There was a funny little guy making the headlines, making the big news.
Yeah. So... Your very funny point made me forget my train of thought.
His awesome, dope institute.
Oh, yeah. I didn't make a whole lot of, written down notes about this, but as I was compiling my thoughts, I read that he also, joined a lot of feminist organizations, and I believe he at least published works on, like, racism and how that wasn't cool.
Mm-hmm.
So he really cared very deeply about, like, a lot of other causes that didn't just affect him as well.
Yeah, a big one, too, of his many, many pet causes that he had was ending prostitution. He was a very big proponent about saying that, like, no one does this for the fact of, like, just getting money, and we should end like so. In a small way, he was kind of like, at least in his rhetoric when he was talking about prostitution, almost seemed like a socialist to some extent, or someone who kind of understood that there was an innate evil to exploitation in sex work.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, that's always like a big green flag for me, because I always think like, it's very easy, obviously, to care about causes that affect you, but if you think about like the amount of cis gay men who I've met who did not give a fucking shit about feminism, and like, so when I see people who care about causes that affect like other communities that they're not a part of, that's always like a major green flag for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, and not even just like be a part of it, but like really contribute as much as he did.
Yeah.
To the point where he was literally like hiring the people he was, researching, studying.
Yeah.
He was like he wasn't it was clear that these weren't just experiments for him to like, be the nerdy sociopathic social studies major. It's just like data and facts. Like he had a genuine connection with the people that he was trying to understand.
Yeah.
And and really, like, I've read only one of his books, but it was Berlin's Third Sex, and if you read it, you can it's a lot of like personal stories of people he's met all throughout Berlin as a like sex therapist, I guess you would call him now.
Yeah.
Yeah, like just all of it, and it's very personal stories, and it's very humanizing, and I think that was his biggest goal, was to humanize homosexuals to a broader audience, and to help that, and like it's commendable. It's commendable what he was able to achieve, and it's unfortunate we have only what little remains. But I'll leave it to you to talk further.
Yeah. So, what is that fucking quote? Nothing gold can stay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
You don't know what you got until it's gone.
Yeah. So, the Nazis came around.
Yeah. They come marching in. If you don't know history, they're pretty bad. They're not cool.
Good base descriptor. We can build on that.
They're not too hot on gay and trans people, even though they look...
And he was Jewish as well.
Yeah, he was Jewish too, which was not helping the situation either.
No.
But yeah, to what I was saying is that even though they hate gay and trans people, they look like they are walking straight out of an S&M gay factory of some sort.
Yeah, so unfortunately a lot of, I read like a lot of, they got into his institute and they were brutalizing the employees there, chanting "Burn Hirschfeld." His entire like research books pretty much were all burned. The Nazi book burnings, they were actually among some of the very first to be burned. Like they went right there.
I'm sure. I mean, because it's just like it like even on a base understanding of both of these entities, Hirschfeld and his research and the Nazi Party of Germany, it's almost like you can't get farther distance from reactionary versus like a genuine leftist progressive institution.
Yeah. Thank God he was not in Germany when the book burnings happened.
Was he just like on tour or something? Was he just
No, he very intentionally left.
I'm sure, yeah, he must have been just seeing the wind, and he's like, yeah, God,
well, he
I
actually,
gotta get out of here.
he lived around like France and like other areas because he actually really, really wanted to move back to Berlin.
I'm sure, yeah, because it's his homeland. This is where he's got all his shit.
Yeah, I don't remember every single detail of where he lived, but I have a suspicion he did not end up going back because it just...
I'm
he
sure
was waiting for it to improve politically.
I'm sure he just, like, the day after day, it was just becoming clearer and clearer. It's just like, I can't go back. If I do, I'm going to die, and there's no point at this point.
Which is incredibly depressing. for a lot of obvious reasons. And, just another fact, and it is the last fact that I have today on Magnus Hirschfeld. He died exactly on his 67th birthday of a heart attack. Just the exact day, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Funny how that worked out.
Yeah, and it's also kind of sad too, to the extent that, what little I know of his final days, which were, from what little information there really was, it was kind of a dreary time for this man who really deserved a lot better, especially in his final days. He was, I read a lot that he was clearly very depressed, and he didn't even really do any more writings or research. He almost kind of felt it was pointless at that point. So it was not good days, but thankfully, kind of on a higher note on that is that we do have some of his books around, some of his research did maintain, and thankfully, and it may not be as good as the alternative of all that research and valuable, livelihood that he lost and everything like that, but also at the same time, at least we can still maintain and know who he was and maintain the memory of him and remember him and thank him and respect, but also appreciate what little of the work we managed to still have in publication and circulation.
Yeah, definitely. And, I kind of wanted to share all, the little bits about him and his life and then kind of apply it to today, because a really common rhetoric that you hear, about trans people, specifically, more queer, gender non-conforming, maybe even neo-pronoun using type of trans people, or more sexually evolved groups, I guess you could call it. You hear that this is new. You hear that it's this funky new, the kids these days, and then, you hear stories like his, and you think, no, it isn't new. It's just that when it was said before, y'all burned it, and exiled people, and imprisoned, and killed, and burned them, and,
It was wiped out under reactionary tides, as it often is.
And then you look at it today, and I literally saw, a post in my feed today of, 5 LGBTQ books that have been banned from schools and shit like that, and you're just seriously? We're still doing this? Yeah. And, granted, not to make light of, the Nazi book burnings, obviously that's a way different end of, the spectrum that is very, very intense, but, you look at it and you're there are similarities, though.
Well, no, I mean, they're both reactionary. They both come from a reactionary take.
And they're both very suppressive and very oppressive, and it's just so, I always...
shouldn't be taken lightly. This is the point of, anti-fascism. Is the point of even seeing the small stuff of just we're taking this out of the public library, of saying fuck no. No, nah, you keep that shit in the books. You keep that fucking on the shelves. Mm-hmm. In fact, we got 20 other books we want up there as well.
Yeah, definitely. And it's this, I think there's this weird... I mean, I would say I don't know why, but I think I know exactly why. I think it's very, society and culture have been very intentionally engineered this way. Where you can see all of these atrocious things, and for various reasons, whether you've got some severe compassion fatigue going on, or, you just, due to, the time poverty that we're all under and the amount of work we're all doing, you just don't have the energy to be as concerned as you should be. But there's so much shit happening, that's affecting... all kinds of minority groups, and there is this air of I hate this, I don't like this, I'm very scared, I'm very uncomfortable, but I feel powerless to do anything about it. So nothing gets done, and then big shit like Roe v. Wade gets overturned, or trans people are banned from sports or seeking healthcare under 18, and just
just targeted by outright hate groups that are patrolling the streets.
Yeah. And it's this very weird simultaneous like state of emergency and also life as usual, which I think is very not good for people mentally.
Yeah, I mean, I think, kind of connecting with what you were saying is that, like, there is always this, like, idea of people just thinking, like, oh, I've never heard of trans people until, like, now, so they must have never existed before. And, I mean, even in Hirschfeld's time, this wasn't new. This wasn't something that it just wasn't studied before. Well, I mean, even before him, there were people studying it, but like as an extensive amount that since him. But this is a long history, and it fucking came from our genesis. It came from all the way to the very beginning. It is it's an identity. It's a part of us.
Well, yeah.
And it's important to have an understanding and research. So I think, especially connecting too with what, like, our misgivings with psychiatry and sex therapy and the understanding of, human knowledge or whatever you want to call it, that, it's really important to have people like Hirschfeld who are not swayed by reactionary biases and are genuinely interested from a human compassion and a point of empathy to understand the people that are around us. And not exile them because we just don't understand.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think and even outside of that field, I think it speaks to a very broad point of how, ultimately, in an ideal world, everything should be done out of empathy, whether for others, for people you don't understand, for people like you, or just yourself specifically. But, under capitalism, things are more often just done for money and survival. And it really kind of takes the empathy out of things.
Well, I think the positive note is that, since this was kind of a semi-highlight of Magnus Hirschfeld, all
the lives he made better.
And all the lives that he made better, but also I'm sure we can find some PDF or links to some of his books, so if you want to read, I would encourage you to do so.
Yeah.
Because there's some great reads, really fun, especially if you're someone who is trans, non-binary, anything like that. You might find some really inspiring words to live, part of your life. So we'll leave all that down below, and it should be utterly stressed just how awesome and dope of a motherfucker Magnus Hirschfeld was.
And I mean, it also kind of speaks to, there's a quote out there somewhere that words it much more poetically than I'm about to, but, like, you can burn the books, but the ideas will always still be there. Like, if we think about all that the Nazi Party did to both his institute, but also just queer culture in general, and we're still here.
We're still here.
We're still gay.
We're still here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Gay Programming. It was a jam-packed, fun episode, so I hope you enjoyed it. I know, and I want to give a special thanks to Merlin for headlining and pushing us through this really interesting topic. I think it was really dope, so thank you, Merlin.
Thank you for encouraging me. I feel really good about it.
Yeah, hell yeah, it was really great. Can't wait to edit it. I'm lying. I never fucking want to edit these fucking things. But anyways, thank you so much for listening. We'll do our little spiel. We have an Instagram as a general gay programming. If you want updates on when these episodes come out, you can find us at Gay Programming on Instagram. We have some memes on there too for you to peruse. We also have accessiblewellness.pdx, which is Merlin's nonprofit, which helps people in our community in Portland, Oregon, get access to items and necessities of life and all that stuff. So please check that out if you're looking to contribute to a cause or anything. We also have his book down there if you wanted some reading other than Magnus Hirschfeld. And I also go by FemMarks on my Instagram, where I upload poetry and zines and doodles and all that stuff. So if you like my funny little gags, maybe you might enjoy that. But yeah, we'll see you next time we record. And Merlin, do you have anything you want to leave off on the audience with?
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. See you guys.
Bye-bye.